Hello everyone and welcome to this video for the Bicester School History Department. This is a GCSE video for those studying AQA GCSE History. Today we're going to be looking specifically at the conflict and tension in Asia Booklet. You can download the booklet from the school website and the link is below in the description. Make sure you've got it before you start. The purpose of this video is to give you some pointers on some key areas, to talk through the general story of what happens at the start of Vietnam, and to give you some advice on how to answer the questions. I continue to pause and use this video as you work through it. Don't watch it all at once. Watch a bit, then do the task, and it's there to give you a little bit of extra advice. If you need any help, make sure to email your history teacher for any more specifics. You could be working on this booklet on a computer, or you could have it printed out and writing it out in full. Make sure to continue to check ePraise for any specific tasks that your teacher's asking you to do. But let's get straight started. Hopefully by now you've finished the career section of this booklet, and you've seen how the Cold War has heated up. The tension between capitalist USA and communist USSR was about to spill over in Vietnam. But before we get there, we need to understand why Vietnam was the perfect place for this battle to take place. And we need to start with who ruled Vietnam before World War II. The answer to that is France. France used to own Vietnam as part of an empire called Indochina, but it wasn't very popular. However, during World War II, it was taken over by Japan. Now, Japan was an ally of Nazi Germany, and they were trying to take over large parts of the world. However, during this time, there was a rebellion against Japanese rule, and it was led by a man called Ho Chi Minh. Now, Ho Chi Minh was a communist, and he had studied communism in Russia in the 1920s, and he didn't like Japanese rule. So he fought up against the Japanese in Vietnam. They used a style of fighting called guerrilla warfare. This means avoiding a direct battle and fighting in sort of little bursts. We'll talk more about this later. However, after World War II, France wanted control of Vietnam back. Ho Chi Minh and his newly formed army, the Viet Minh, didn't want to give France control, so they fought a war against each other. This led to the embarrassing event of Dien Bien Phu, where a large group of French soldiers were comprehensively defeated by the Viet Minh. Your first task is to complete task 7 by rereading through the information above and seeing if you can fill out these questions. There were consequences to Dien Bien Phu. The most important was that France was very embarrassed. It had been defeated by a country that they might consider less important than them. They lost 3,000 soldiers and 8,000 more in captivity. This led to the 1954 Peace Conference in Geneva. Now this is, if you remember, just after the Korean War, so tensions are still going to be high. There are many conclusions made by the Geneva Agreement, but perhaps the most significant was that they agreed to split Vietnam along the 17th parallel, with the North being communist and the South being anti-communist. For those who remember from Korea, this is exactly the same way around. So it's a nice way to remember. The North is always communist and the South is always capitalist. The USA supported the South because they had an idea called domino theory. This is very similar to containment. If you have a look at this diagram here, you can see how the Americans thought They thought that if Vietnam became communist and the Vietcong were able to turn it communist, then the rest of Southeast Asia would follow, with Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, India and Bangladesh soon forming. America wanted to stop the spread of communism, and so they gave money and support to the South Vietnamese government. Now have a go at task 8. See if you can answer those questions. Moving on to task 9, we can see here the support that the Americans gave to South Vietnam. Now, the leader of South Vietnam was a man called President Diem, and he was a very harsh leader. He was very unpopular, but the Americans supported him because they preferred a harsh leader to a communist leader. The thing is, this wasn't necessarily the best idea. Diem was a very harsh leader. He was a Catholic and persecuted the majority of the country who were Buddhist. Here, if you look at the picture, you can see a Buddhist monk setting himself on fire to protest against the government. This is him setting himself on fire. He was also very corrupt. He wasted money, took government money, and gave jobs to his friends or family. This turned the Vietnamese people against Diem, and by in turn, the Americans. Have a go at task 9. Task 10 is all about the Vietcong. Now, the Vietcong are the name of Ho Chi Minh's army that he formed to fight against the South Vietnamese. From now on, we're going to call them the Vietcong. They fought a style of warfare called guerrilla warfare. We talked about it before. It was a way to fight a war without having a front line. They would fight in small ambushes or set traps. We'll talk more about the tactics that the Vietcong use in the next episode. However, the Vietcong became popular and Diem became unpopular. See if you can have a go at task 10. This next portion looks at the US involvement and domino theory. Now, as mentioned before, domino theory was the fear that if Vietnam became communist, then the rest of Southeast Asia would follow. America did not want this to happen, so as mentioned before, they gave money to help the South Vietnamese protect themselves. 1.6 billion between 1954 and 1960. They also sent military advisors. Now, these were essentially military personnel who were training the South Vietnamese to fight the Vietcong. They also gave them the best weapons and lots of ammunition. But the Americans didn't just try to give them money, they also tried to give them moral support to try and win and this is a really important phrase, the hearts and minds of the population. This meant they just wanted the support of the Vietnamese people. To try and do this, they came up with the Strategic Hamlets Programme. This was essentially a programme to move entire villages from areas controlled by the Vietcong to areas controlled by the South Vietnam, literally moving houses. The idea was to take them away from the influence of the Vietcong, and that was really important. We'll talk more about why this is important to the Vietcong tactics next time. However, this was hated by the Vietnamese people. And you can imagine being told to move your house or your belongings to another part of the country. They also hated having to pay for defences. And particularly in Vietnamese culture, it's traditional to live where your ancestors are buried. People hated that they had to move. See if you can use that information to answer task 11. And so finally, for today's episode, in 1964 there was an incident called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. North Vietnamese patrol boats opened fire on the US ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. If you're interested, the ship is called the USS Maddox. I don't know why I remember that one. The US ship was patrolling in the area of the Gulf of Tonkin and was attacked by a North Vietnamese patrol boat. The American government acted quickly and gave President Johnson the power to take all necessary measures to prevent further aggression and achieve peace and security. In short, it allowed America to enter into a full-scale war. No longer were they just giving money and sending advisors, now they were sending troops. And so in 1965, the first troops arrived inshore at Da Nang, and America launched an operation called Operation Rolling Thunder, a mass bombing campaign to attack the North Vietnamese. We'll talk more about these next time. However, for task 12, you've got to write an account. Now, last time we looked at how to answer account questions, and this is exactly the same. Remember, you've got to write in chronological order. Write in the order that things happen. You also need to write down the key phrases, such as "this led to." So how did the Gulf of Tonkin incident become a major importance in the development of the US involvement in Vietnam? Well, think about how it led to the US launching full military operations in Vietnam, and how it led to Operation Rolling Thunder. I hope this has been useful to you in helping you work through the booklet. If you need any more help, make sure to email your history teacher. Thank you and have a really good day.